This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of King of the Unknown, Cosmic Dash, and Freedman. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and we're two guys with advanced degrees discussing webcomics.
That's right. And on this episode, our very first of 2017, we're going to be looking at three webcomics. We're going to begin with Marcus Muller's King of the Unknown. After that, we're going to look at Cosmic Dash by David Davis. And then we're going to wrap up with an already completed webcomic by Peter Quash, Freedman. But before we get to those, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price, and every single month you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials can be as much as 45% off of the cover price, sometimes as much as 50% off cover, but you know you can find discounts at times that are even more impressive than that.
And we'd be remiss if we didn't also point out their sister company, mydigitalcomics.com, where they offer a lot of your favorite comics in a electronic format. And we are a webcomics podcast, so it makes sense that you might be interested in the e-format version. All of their books are available in PDF and CBZ formats that are DRM free, which is fantastic, as I'm sure many of you know. They have a lot of your favorite publishers like Top Cow and Image and Action Lab and dozens and dozens of others. And anything you purchase, we need to point out that on mydigitalcomics.com earns you 5% off your DCBS purchase. So you get kind of a 2-for-1 almost kind of deal on your electronic purchases.
Yeah, that 2-for-1 deal is just another reason why you should go to Discount Comic Book Service and mydigitalcomics.com. Those guys know how to treat their customers. So check out dcbservice.com and mydigitalcomics.com for all of your comics needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Sean and Derek sent you. Well, Sean, Happy New Year, my friend.
Happy New Year, Derek. How was your holidays?
It was okay. We had a good time. There was tons of travel and family labors involved, but there were one or two relaxing moments somewhere there in the mix.
Yeah, you were saying you were like all over the eastern half of the country, pretty much, right? You were did a big triangle from Texas to the coast, and then back up to the Midwest and back down again.
Yeah, so I want to stay put for a while.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
But how about you? How's your holiday?
Mine was very relaxing because prior to the holidays, I was doing a lot of traveling for work-related stuff, and so my wife and I said, you know what, we're not going anywhere this year. Let's just sit around the house and not do anything for a good week or two, and that's what we ended up doing. It was very relaxing, quite enjoyable.
Well, good. And I'm hoping that all of our listeners also had a great holiday season and a happy new year. And this is our first episode of the new year of 2017, and what better way to start off the new year than sharing with everyone some listener email that we've received.
Mail time.
Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
We love getting listener email. It lets us know how we're doing and provides insights and information on other stuff that we try and keep abreast of, but maybe can't always keep up with. Because there's just one of the great things about webcomics is there's so much going on, and it's always great when somebody is willing to help us keep track of all of it.
That's right. And it's also really good when we get email from the creators whose webcomics we actually discuss on the episode. And Sean, you remember that back in December, one of the webcomics that we looked at was Theatrics by Neil Gibson.
Yes.
And in fact, after that episode went up, Neil got in touch with us on Twitter and thanked us and wanted to thank us via email. So I sent him the email address, and he responded, "You guys rock." And then he gave us some information that he would like us to share with our listeners. He says, "I thought I'd let you know about our new film competition. Previews World announced it today." And this was back at the very beginning of January. But we want a proper news outlet like the Comics Alternative to spread the message. So that's us, Sean. We're a proper news outlet.
I like the sound of that. I might put that on my business cards.
Yeah. And the press release he's talking about gives information about a film competition that Gibson's company, TPub Comics, is sponsoring, and I will read parts of this flyer. It really is interesting. And, one of the things we mentioned last month when we were discussing Theatrics is that Gibson also does a series of gothic or horror stories, part of his Twisted Dark series. And in fact, this new film competition has everything to do with that comic series. And I'm reading from the press release now. TPub Comics are offering students and aspiring filmmakers a fantastic opportunity to produce, create, and direct their interpretation of an original Twisted Dark story. There will be 4 to choose from. However, multiple entries are also welcome. The shortlisted and winning films will be screened at the Chicago City Comic-Con in April 2017. It says the top prizes will include $5,000 in cash and mentorship by Jamie Childs, the director of Stan Lee's Lucky Man. So that's really good. And if you want to find out more about this, go to the TPub website, and that is www.tpub.co.uk. Again, that's www.tpub.co.uk.
That sounds like a really fun and interesting competition. I'll be. Fortunately, the nice thing with me being in Chicago, I'll be around. I should be able to attend those screenings too, to see what the finalists are actually able to put together. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's right. You can report from the field.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now it says on this press release that the competition it's live right now, but it will close in March of this year. Now I don't know when in March the submission deadline will be. But again, go to the website tpub.co.uk to find out more information. So, Sean, let's jump into the January webcomics, and we're going to begin with, I guess we can call this an ongoing webcomic, even though it hasn't been updated in over 3 years now. This is King of the Unknown by Marcus Muller, and you can find this at kingoftheunknown.com. And it gets its name, King of the Unknown, because the main character is the king of rock and roll himself. Yes. Elvis Aaron Presley.
Elvis Presley. It's a later version of Elvis Presley, we might add. It's a contemporary story, a relatively contemporary story. So it's not the young, hip Elvis that everybody loved. It's more the post-Vegas Elvis. With all the flash and the weight and the sweating and the not always pleasant to look at as he used to be in his youth version of Elvis, I guess you might call it.
Right. Now you say that it's a current day story, but maybe I missed something. My sense of things is that it didn't take place in the 70s before he died, but that people don't know that he's still alive, but he is actually now a supernatural detective.
Right.
Is that correct? So it's taking place current day.
I kind of got the impression it was current day, mostly based on there's a scene later on in there where he visits a nursing home, and there's a television there playing some old movies, and it's just the design of the television looks like more of a contemporary flat screen. That was about the only thing that I got that really defined it as more contemporary than a period piece.
Right, and as we were talking about this matter just now, I was looking at the first 2 or 3 pages of the webcomic to see if there is a temporal marker, in other words, a date or a rough year where things begin, and I don't see this, and so I'll just assume that this is current day and that this is an Elvis that people assume is dead, but he's actually not. He's a supernatural gothic, I guess, maybe, detective. I was about to say crime fighter. Not really a crime fighter.
Not really a crime fighter,
yeah.
But...
and this is... No, I said a moment ago this is an ongoing comic, but it hasn't been updated since August of 2013. And we're currently in the first story, the first episode, which is called I'd Lose My Head Without You. And I think that there are, about 34, 35 installments of that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Although it was interesting. I did look at whatever the latest installment he has. He's got a note at the bottom, says something to the effect of, I'll try and get back as soon as I can. I'm really busy, etc., etc. And then there's a couple of other comments, and then one of his responses to that it was like a year or two later, and said, "Yeah, I know this has been on hiatus too long. I'm trying to get back to it. Please check out on my Facebook page to see for updates." And so I went over to his Facebook page, and he does indeed have a post from late December that says he is coming back to it. It's not totally dead. He is coming back to it in 2017, and we'll be seeing more of it in the near future. He didn't have any details, but he did say he's still working on it. He's still coming back.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm looking at the website, and one of the comments, because there's several under this latest installment from 2013, is from December 26th of 2016. So that wasn't that long ago. He says, "Happy holidays. Hope you all had a great one, and that continues into the new year. There's a special holiday image I put together for Stash Comics, who will be publishing The King of the Unknown graphic novel next year. The King will return in 2017. So that's even more ambiguous. Now, does this mean that he'll continue updating or get back to updating The King of the Unknown webcomic, or has he been working on it and holding on to everything for a graphic novel or a hardback or I guess a hard copy version of King of the Unknown in 2017?
Or some combination thereof, too, right?
It could be, yeah.
We've had many webcomic that we've reviewed that started off as a webcomic, and then as it was winding down, led into the publication, the print publication of it, too.
Yeah, although I would guess that he's not going to do both. In other words, begin updating, picking up where he left off the webcomic, and come out with a hard copy version for this reason. We only have about 34, 35 pages of story with King of the Unknown, this first episode. There's not really much there. I love what's there. I think it's intriguing, but he's just getting started. And so it doesn't seem to make sense for him to now begin playing out the rest of the story online when he's going to come out with the book this year, unless he's going to come out with the book in 2017 at the end of the year. So that would make sense. But I don't see why he would update the webcomic while the book is coming out or right before the book would be coming out, because then that would, I guess, take some of the sales momentum, the potential sales momentum from the actual print copy.
Well, that speaks to a kind of a broader question on what's the kind of the best marketing approach here, because there is certainly a potential that, and I haven't seen this done often, but I have seen this done where a creator will have the book done, right? He's done a full graphic novel, 100 pages, 200 pages, whatever it is. They put it out there as available for sale, right? And they're selling either a print-on-demand thing, or they've got some batch of them printed up, or however they're doing it. But then they still continue to release it as a webcomic in the interim. And even though you can go out and you can buy the completed version, have it in your hands as a physical copy, they'll continue to update the website with the updated material. And the way that kind of works, and I think the thinking behind it, as near as I can put my marketing hat on and determine, is that if you're enjoying the story, that's great. You will be able to read the story in its entirety for free. But if you want to read it all now, if you want to have that done and just sit down and not wait week in and week out for each little installment, drip, 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 drip. If you want to have all that done now, you can send me $20 and I'll send you the hard copy. And I have seen that done a few times. I don't know how successful that necessarily is. There's still a lot of economic variability, I guess you might say, in how people are setting up their business models with webcomics. But I have seen that done, and it would not be unprecedented if Marcus did that as well. I don't know if that's his plan necessarily, but that is an option I have seen.
Yeah, and that kind of option makes sense to me, because if someone wants to go ahead and get everything all at once, then they can pay out and not wait for the digital or webcomic version to come out, over, every week or every other week or however often it is updated. I really like that. And the thing I like most about that is the fact that something like that is probably the choice of the creator. What I tend to appreciate much less is when larger publishers get a hold of webcomic material and then change the availability of the original webcomic in one form or another. Mm-hmm. A good example of this is from a couple of years ago when Noel Stevens published in hard copy version Nimona.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember who the publisher was on that. It was Harper. It was Harper Collins. Yeah. And it was available as a webcomic up until before, I guess not too long before the book's pub date, or at least after they started advertising that the book would come out. And then they took down the vast majority of the webcomic. Now, from a publisher's point of view, that makes sense. I mean, I understand wanting to take away the availability of the completed webcomic text, because then why would someone get the book? But as a reader of webcomics, it seems a little chintzy. I mean, I can understand it, but I don't necessarily like it. Something similar was going on with First Second. Now, remember, not quite a year ago, or maybe it was exactly a year ago, for our January show of last year, one of the books that we discussed was Tony Cliff's Delilah Dirk and the King's Shilling.
Yep.
And at that point, there was only maybe the first chapter of that book available, because in another month or so, it was going to be published by First Second as a completed text.
Right.
So we never even saw the completed webcomic Delilah Dirk and the King's Shilling. There was a completed webcomic of Delilah Dirk and the Turkish Lieutenant, but then when First Second published that book, I think that they had him take down all but something like the first chapter of that. So First, Second, and Harper have the creators take this down. Again, I can understand that as a business model. It makes sense. But as a reader of webcomics, and also someone who tends to privilege the independent creator over established publishing bodies, let's say, that's a less attractive option, what we find with Stevenson's Nimona or Cliff's Delilah Dirk. By the way, did you listen to mine and Andy's favorite comics of 2016 episode?
I have not had a chance yet, no.
Oh, okay.
It's on the list, though.
I mentioned that because one of my favorites of 2016 was Delilah Dirk and the King's Shilling.
And with good reason. That was an excellent book, excellent story.
Wonderful. Yeah, and not just a wonderful book for young readers or a wonderful part of a webcomic. It was a wonderful story, period.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, getting back to the matter at hand, I'm curious now what we will see come of King of the Unknown. But of the portion that we have already, I really like.
Yeah, and actually we've gone on for a little bit here and really haven't talked too much about the comic itself yet. As we've said though, it is an older Elvis as a paranormal investigator, and we like you said, we don't have a whole lot of story to go on yet, but very early, I think it was the first page or two, right? We have basically a headless horseman decapitates some woman crossing the Brooklyn Bridge, steals her head, and then goes on I guess you could say a short murder spree. And that's when Elvis here is brought in to help investigate that. And what we see primarily so far, he's only just in the story, what we've got online, he's only just caught up with this woman. But most of the story is kind of the background of him trying to investigate it and getting some of the history in a sort of metaphysical, spiritual way. He's not the type of guy, as you would expect with Elvis, he's not the type of guy to sit down in the library and do research or get on the computer and do research.
Right.
He's very hands-on. He's very much in that kind of the spiritual realm of looking at the other side and trying to see what's going on in a very mystical kind of manner.
Right. But at the same time, he's quite garish in his manners. I mean, this is someone who, again, this is the overweight Elvis, and so he has no qualms appearing with, let's say, little clothing on at times, farting, eating all the time, making... I guess sexist statements or making his opinion known regardless of who's around or what context it is. So, yeah, he's, I guess, a bit of a scamp, if we want to say that. And how often is the word scamp used on podcasts nowadays?
Not frequently enough, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah. But yeah, you mentioned the Headless Horseman. Now, this is not Washington Irving's Headless Horseman. This does not take place in the Catskills. It takes place in New York, but not the Catskills. And so this headless figure is described as a Doulahan, which is, legendary headless figure. So again, it's not necessarily one associated with Ichabod Crane. And in addition to Elvis, he has, I guess we can call him his sidekick, named Vinny, and Vinny is, how to describe Vinny? A robotic assistant with the spirit of Leonardo da Vinci.
That's, I think, exactly the best way to describe him.
Yes. So how did Leonardo da Vinci's spirit get into this contraption, this robot, or whatever we want to call it? It doesn't matter. We haven't got to that point of the story yet. And even if this were a completed story, why would you necessarily need to know how Leonardo da Vinci's spirit got into that robot? Just accept it. Yeah,
just run with it. Yeah. And it's an interesting interpretation of Leonardo da Vinci too. It's not. You see if you learn about Da Vinci through, your art class or your history class or whatever, he's usually poised as a fairly stately figure. This is not a stately Leonardo da Vinci. I'll say that. He matches well in a lot of ways the Elvis that we're seeing here too.
Yeah. When we first see Vinny, he's in the kitchen. What's he doing? Making pancakes?
Yes.
Yeah, Da Vinci did everything else. Why not making pancakes?
Yeah, sure.
But these are not the only historical figures in this webcomic, because I guess he is Elvis's superior in the agency is someone by the name of Agent H, and it's Jimi Hendrix.
Of course.
Or a Jimi Hendrix that people assume is dead, kind of like Elvis, but actually is working for this paranormal agency. And this leads me to wonder, as this story unfolds, are we eventually, in whatever form, are we going to see more of these actual historical figures in brought into the story in some way or another? And are these figures going to be dead? So, for instance, will a Jim Morrison show up?
I'm looking forward to seeing Janis Joplin personally.
Or Janis Joplin or a Kurt Cobain. People that we think are dead, but who actually aren't. And are they all going to be musicians?
I think there's a lot of interesting things you can do with this. I'm just on a personal level, for the type of music that I enjoy, I'm just amused the fact that Jimi Hendrix is given a superior rating than Elvis Presley. That's just me. That's just the type of music I listen to. That's just me. But it was a nice little commentary, as it were, to put Elvis a little bit farther down on the totem pole than really king of rock and roll.
Although Elvis is the protagonist of the story.
True, but not the most pleasant protagonist, not the most heroic that you'd seen either.
Yeah, that's true. But again, that's what makes one of the things that makes this webcomic fun. And I think the best, if I could only choose one word to describe King of the Unknown, it would be fun.
Yes.
I mean, Muller has a great sense of humor, and it comes through in both broad and also very subtle ways. We mentioned this kind of unorthodox figure of Elvis Presley as a paranormal investigator, and the kind of things that he does and the situations that he puts himself in. Those are funny. But there are quite a number of smaller, much more subtle jokes in this webcomic that could kind of fly under the radar if you weren't really paying attention to them. And I think, like, for instance, at one point, and I'm looking, this is on the very last page I have up, he is fighting this Dullahan who has taken over the body of this grandmother figure, this older woman. And as he is fighting her in the old folks' home, because apparently this Dullahan has gone on a killing spree inside the old folks' home, when Elvis is hitting this granny figure, and she goes by the name Granny, the sound effect when he does it is judo.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting. But also in this same panel where that sound effect is the word judo, when he gives a judo punch, is you see in the background the movie that the old woman, or the spirit, or the Dullahan, had been watching. And, I can't remember what old cheesy horror film this is.
The Brain That Would Not Die.
The Brain That Would Not Die. That's right.
Yep.
And so we see that. Now, one of the things I really appreciated about Muller's work here is that he does something that I used to absolutely love when Burke Breathed did this back in the 1980s, and that is he would use actual real-life images or photographic images or reproductions of some sort and insert them in very subtle ways into his cartoons or into his comics. So I remember, one of my favorites is I don't know if it was in Milo's house or where, but the characters are talking, and on a wall behind them is a framed photograph, and the photograph is of Colonel Sanders, or the Kentucky Fried Chicken Colonel Sanders icon, the famous image of him. And I mean, you can tell that obviously was not Breathed's art inserted into Bloom County, but it was there. And little things like that, or that famous picture of Albert Einstein sticking his tongue out. And so Breathed would insert those kind of images occasionally in the comic, and we have something similar going on here with King of the Unknown. Now, in the instance, I guess they're in the television room, the Brain That Wouldn't Die is on, and this is in multiple panels. But there are other instances in this brief portion of King of the Unknown that we have so far where there are actual images that Muller inserts, and I look at those as little short jokes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of neat little stuff like that. There's he's clearly putting in not just these references to other material, but just little bits of business that he's got going on in the background. Like there's the sequence there where they're in the briefing room. Hendrix is up there going through, here's the the characters that we're dealing with, and here's what we know, and, you know, giving his slideshow presentation and whatnot. And most of the people in the room are sitting down, paying attention, listening, trying to absorb the material, and Elvis is ripping up one of the notepads to make a little spitball to throw in the back of Jimi Hendrix's afro.
Right.
And he's not, you know, you're still getting the narration of Hendrix going through the here's what we know kind of thing and giving the exposition that's necessary for the plot to move forward. But then the visual is of Elvis, you know, making this little spitball and whatever. It's a nice little bit of business that I think says a lot to the type of storytelling that Muller is putting together here. You know, he's consciously thinking about the things that are going on and who these characters are, and they're not just, okay, I need this bit of exposition, so I'm going to spill all this stuff going out. He's thinking, okay, here I need this exposition, I've got to spill this stuff out. Well, what is Elvis doing during that time? You know, he doesn't care. He's not interested in the you know, it's a nice character building moment while he's doing, you know, the whatever necessary storytelling elements he's got to go around. And I think that's what a lot of those little subtle references are. You know, his little bits of dialogue, the photo usage that, you know, like you mentioned. I think that's stuff that he's putting in to enhance the overall experience, and he's doing that deliberately, and I think very well.
Right. Yeah. In fact, I was just looking at a couple of other examples of the pages that we have so far, and at the breakfast scene where Vinny is making the pancakes for Elvis, he comes in without his shirt on. Vinny asks him, he says, "Pancakes are almost done. Would you like some OJ?" And Elvis says, "Yeah, that'd be awesome. What's the big deal if I blasted your B&Vs with my glory stick anyway?" Betty and Veronica, because previous to this, Elvis makes the comment about finding Vinny's Betty and Veronica comics in the bathroom and how they helped him to, how should we say, relieve himself in certain ways. So Elvis says, "What's the big deal if I blasted your B&Vs with my glory stick anyway? I figured you'd be more into Archie's Kevin Keller, aren't you? You know?" You know, little things like that. And then as Elvis is saying this is another one of these photographic inserts. He's looking at the morning newspaper, and the headline is "Aliens Walk Among Us," and underneath is a photograph of Scott Baio.
Yes.
A mature Scott Baio.
A mature Scott Baio, I might add, from before the whole presidential cycle.
Exactly,
And, you know, whatever craziness you may have seen in the past year from him, this is before that.
Yeah. So apparently Marcus Muller was really onto something when it came to Donald Trump's shenanigans for the presidential campaign. Clearly
he knew something we did not.
Yeah. Yeah, which would be reason enough to definitely check this webcomic out.
Yeah. No, it's enjoyable. I'm looking forward to seeing what Muller does in 2017 here, both from just a kind of a publishing standpoint and to check out what he's doing with the story.
Yeah, because it really is a fun webcomic. I wish we had more of it to share, but right now the 30-some pages that are up, you will definitely enjoy. So check out King of the Unknown, and you can find this at kingoftheunknown, that's one word, .com. Well, Sean, let's move on to the next webcomic for the month, and this is Cosmic Dash. Mm-hmm. This is written and drawn by David Davis, and you can find this at cosmic-dash.com. This began in January of 2010, and it's going on currently.
Yeah, although I don't think he's had an update yet in January. He tends to work, from what I've been reading this for a little while now, and the way he tends to work is he goes in these spurts. He's got his overall story broken up into, I don't know if you want to call them chapters per se. I think he actually calls them episodes at some point. And he'll basically do, okay, here's one episode, and he does a page a week for however long that lasts, a month or 2 months or 3 months or whatever, and then takes a couple of weeks off to get the next one up and running. And maybe he'll have a couple of little bits in between, some short stories, some vignettes, and that kind of thing. But the crux of his overall story is on, I don't want to say hiatus, but he's kind of in a little bit of a break between episodes at the moment.
Yeah. And in fact, the way that, you had mentioned the way that he breaks this up by episode, the way that he does divide these stories or separate one from the other, it kind of makes sense to me if you go to, let's say, the archives and look at the storyline guide, although at the same time it's a little confusing. So from what I can see, there are 2 volumes of Cosmic Dash, and he calls them Volume 0 and then Volume 1. With Volume 0, we have 5 episodes, okay? So it's like chapters, I guess. But at the same time, with Volume 0, he also calls this, when he describes it, the first season of Cosmic Dash. So is it a season? Is it a volume? And are the episodes sections of this Volume 0 / first season, or what? So there are 5 episodes to this first grouping, however we choose to call them. And then this second grouping, or Volume 1 as he's calling it, he's already completed 1 episode, and he has started the second, or has he finished the second? I think he may have finished this. Yeah, he's finished the second. And so now we're waiting on the 3rd episode of this next volume. But these various episodes of Comic Dash are not all of what you can find in this webcomic, because interspersed between the various episodes are short strips. Sometimes they're just 1 page, sometimes they can be 2, 3, or 4 pages long. There's also sprinkled in there is quite a bit of fan art. Dedicated readers of Cosmic Dash contribute their own work. In interpretations of this story world for them, and that Davis will put these up. So even though we haven't had, and I can't remember when the 2nd episode of this latest volume ended, but there's still been some updates since then.
Yeah. I think we've had, I think I saw some updates going up through December, if I remember right. But they were, like we said, they're not the kind of like that primary part of the story. They're these little vignettes and short story pieces he's been doing lately. I expect from kind of the pattern I was kind of getting a sense of in looking through the archives, I have a feeling he'll have the next storyline really starting up on the tail end of January sometime.
Okay. Sean, one of the things I like most about Cosmic Dash is the way that Davis not only has organized the website and the information that you can find, but the kind of information that he provides. We'll often on the Webcomics show talk not just about the story of the webcomics themselves, right? What they're about, whether we like them or not, or whether they're decipherable, or if, things are easy to find in an archive. But we'll talk about, maybe you want to call it the peripherals around the story proper. And that is, what do we find on the About page? Is it just information about the creator or creators, or is there information, some context about the webcomic itself, the story that's being told here? Do you have a character listing? Is there some kind of timeline? Is there supplementary texts or lore texts that are involved in some way or another? Mm-hmm. Now, to greater or lesser degrees, many webcomics have at least some of this stuff. Maybe at a bare minimum, something about like an About page with a character list, a bare minimum character list. But one of the things I absolutely love and appreciate that what Davis provides is the extensive information. Not only do we get a quite detailed character guide, but we get other information as well. For instance, I was impressed by the series timeline. If you click under About on the series timeline, then you will see the episode titles and the amount of time, story time, that these stories take place in. So, for instance, the first story, Chronology, and the story title is called Generals, it takes place over 24 hours. On the other hand, the the story, the episode title called Reboot, took place over 1 week. So it helps to get a sense of what's going on. It gives maybe not essential information, but I think useful supplementary information. He also provides a page devoted to designs and reference art. There's also a reader's guide page that is, I guess we could call a quite detailed about page. It goes beyond what most about pages do. There are a series of maps. There is a collection of lore, so you have prose-based information about the world of Cosmic Dash. And then, as I mentioned, quite an extensive character guide. And so what Davis does is he really does give us a lot for his story world. And I don't... If you may tend to get lost within a vast story world, because, I mean, this is a vast world that Davis has been creating over the past, 6 years now, going on 7.
Yeah.
That he provides a variety of resource materials for you to get anchored.
Yeah, and what one of the things I like about all that yes, it clearly shows that he's thinking about this whole world building concept, right? And he's thinking about, not just these, 4 or 5 main characters and the villain. He's thinking about the whole world that they're inhabiting in, which is great. And that's what a lot of people do. And a lot of people know that helps to build this story, especially with a science fiction setting like we're talking about. But what sets Davis a little bit apart here is that a lot of people think of all that. A lot of creators think of all those different things and try and cram all of that stuff into their story itself.
Right.
Which just bogs it down and makes it dreadfully dull because you've got all this extra exposition and crap that doesn't really advance the story at all.
Or sometimes they do the opposite. They don't include all of that exposition in the story, and they have it in their head, but it's not apparent. So it's difficult for the reader to understand completely the story world because it's never explained, even in supplementary material.
Yeah, but what Davis does is he hits this really great balance of he's got all this stuff figured out in his head. He knows how the world works. He knows how the characters interact. He knows the technology involved. He knows the maps. He knows all of this stuff. And he uses that, that informs the story, but it just informs the story. Right? It doesn't, you're not caught up on all that garbage as you're reading along. You have enough to get the story through, you get the understanding, but maybe some of the background elements aren't in the story itself. But he's still got them available if you're interested, if you're really enjoying the story and want to learn more. You can look at, the technical designs and the maps and all that other stuff. And he does a good job of balancing those two elements to make a very good, compelling story, I think, without being bogged down in the details. But he still has those details there if you want to get into them.
Oh, yeah, and the details can become very involved. I was mentioning the character list. One of the things that's even more impressive on his character list is not so much the sheer number of characters that he describes, some of which are extremely minor. I wouldn't have even thought would be on a character list of a webcomic like this. But he also provides hyperlinks back to the original appearance or the first appearance of these characters, no matter how minor. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, there's Commander Price, which is a human character, and he is an officer, a military officer in the Federation. It's a group that we can discuss. That our heroes in this story are kind of wedged between what is the Federation and the what is the other opposing force? Not the rebels.
Yes.
But anyway, so if you want to find out the very first appearance of Commander Price, then you click on the first appearance link, and it takes you to that page of the webcomic where we first saw him. And I think that's very useful. That's information that I think most readers won't really need or care about much at all, but it's there if you need it or if you want it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we should probably, at this point, explain a little bit. We've talked kind of around the comic, but we haven't actually talked about the comic itself yet.
Yeah, we're doing that a lot this month. We're talking around comics and not the actual stories themselves. So how would you introduce Cosmic Dash to the uninitiated?
Well, I did kind of hint a little earlier. It is a science fiction story. And it's basically about a series of characters who run a cargo transport business. And, you've got the owner of the place, of the ship, you've got a pilot, you've got an engineer, you've got, kind of a medic, you've got a cook, you've got these different characters, they're on the ship, and their job is to take cargo from one planet to another planet. And that's basically it. And they're work for hire. Conceptually, it's not a whole lot of different than Sean Wang's Runners, which we talked about a few months ago, right?
Right, back in November, I think it was.
Right. But the difference is, there's a lot of difference in the tone of the strip, of this comic to the other. Whereas Runners was a lot more weighted with seriousness and of kind of this gritty underworld aspect of that the characters were dealing in and around. There's a lot less of that here. It's a lot more optimistic kind of viewpoint, and I think a lot more above board. The cargo that they're hauling is very legal in most respects. They're working for the government in a lot of cases, or for the Federation. So there's kind of a little bit more of a above board thing, and instead of being more on the pirate end of things, they're the ones that the pirates are trying to get the cargo from in the first place, right? So it's a little, like I said, a little more optimistic, a little happier, and a little lighter in tone, I guess you might say. And I think that's kind of, I guess, an overview. And then most of the stories involve either a very specific instance of, they're trying to get cargo A to location B, and they run against some pirates or whatever technical problems they have or whatnot. Or there's a couple of the stories then start to get into, especially in the later ones, they start to get into some of the backstory of the characters, how they got to be who they are, and that there are other characters out to get them for personal vendetta reasons and that kind of thing.
Right.
So there's kind of these things, even though, the character of Dash, who obviously kind of leads towards the title of the story, even though he's done nothing wrong as an individual, they got this guy, kind of a thug character, who's out to kill him because Dash's dad harmed him in some way years and years and years ago.
Right.
So there's certainly plenty of action and adventure and excitement, but it's a lot more, like I said, a lot lighter in tone and a lot more kind of above the board type of adventures that these characters are having compared to Runners when we talked about that.
Right. Now, you mentioned Runners, and we discussed that back in November. And I believe at the time, you and I were, in describing that, making references to Joss Whedon's Firefly, right? It's
Yes.
very much like that. I mean, there are moments of levity, but for all practical purposes, that's a serious narrative, Runners.
Yeah.
Like Firefly. That same month, another webcomic that we looked at was Greg Craven's Hubris.
Yes.
And Hubris was much more of a gag strip. Now, it seems to me that in describing Cosmic Dash, if you take Runners and Hubris and put them together, that's something like what you get in Cosmic Dash, because as you described, Cosmic Dash, the premise is very similar to Runners, but Cosmic Dash, although not a gag webcomic, right? It's not like a gag an installment or a gag a week, but it's something like that, right? I mean, there were, as we discussed a couple of months ago, ongoing storylines with Craven's Hubris. And we do have an ongoing storyline with Cosmic Dash, but sometimes the pages or the installments, even in an ongoing storyline, many times has that almost punchline feel to it at the very end. Mm-hmm. And so it's much of a lighter story than Runners. And I said I really enjoy Davis's and appreciate what Davis has provided us in terms of the supplementary material. Where I'm less impressed, although I think it's an entertaining story, I'm less impressed with the storytelling that's going on. I think that sometimes the gag element or the humorous element gets in the way of a more cohesive story. And so that's why I brought up this, hubris gag kind of tone to this. I don't know if that completely worked for me. Or maybe I was just too consciously comparing it to Runners, which is relatively fresh in my mind.
Yeah, I could see where you're talking about. I think Sean Wang had in part because he was going for a pretty straight adventure type story, he was focused in on that story element to it, and focused a little more heavily on that end of things. And Davis here, I think, because he's trying to keep it light, because he's keeping it, more comedic. It's not outright funny in most places, but he is trying to keep it a little lighter and more comedic. I think he's then focusing, like you said, is a little bit more on not the gags per se, but he's keeping himself open for a lot of gags and not focusing quite as much on the overall story. Because right. I think, with Runners, one of the interesting things to me was that Wang had developed a lot of really complex scenarios for the characters to get into, right? There was kind of like this double cross and then a triple cross, and this guy was really thinking that, and he's got this huge history with this other character that he didn't relay, and there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. With Runners, with Cosmic Dash, the stories are a lot more straightforward, right? Hey, you need to get cargo A from over to this location, and there are pirates in the way. And that's the element of the story, right? There's not as much twists and turns. There's not as much, I guess, depth in that sense.
Right. And I think a lot of that lightness and along with the humor also comes across in the art, because Davis's art with these characters, it's much more minimal. It is more iconic. The characters themselves are literally more rounded. In other words, fewer sharper edges. In other words, they're more cute kind of characters than you'll find in, let's say, art that may be a little more on the realistic end of the spectrum, right? Mm-hmm. Not that the art that we had with Sean Wang's Runners was realistic in any way, but it does look much more realistic than the art we get in Cosmic Dash. And I think that goes toward its humor. In other words, the kind of characters that are drawn in Cosmic Dash has much more in common with Peanuts than it does Prince Valiant. Just put it that way.
Yeah. You go back to Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics. He had that huge triangle of the different styles of art. And,
right.
Cosmic Dash is definitely more towards the Peanuts end of thing than Prince Valiant.
Another thing that struck me reading, especially the early episodes of Cosmic Dash, is that the stories in many ways seem to be character-driven, yet we didn't get enough of the characters, their backgrounds, their behavior, all the things that that define them, their relationships, in order for at least me as a first-time reader to fully appreciate the situations they were in the story. So, for instance, something would happen with, let's say, one of the characters named Cracker, who's a pilot of the ship, the Lucky Strike, which they're the crew of. And I got the feeling that what I was reading is supposedly typical Cracker, but yet I didn't know enough about Cracker to know what typical Cracker was. And so I felt like I couldn't appreciate this character or the situations that he was in until several other episodes in, where I could get a better feel of who this person was. And so I think that maybe Davis thought that he was giving us enough character early on for us to understand who these people were, but at least I wasn't as a reader. Now, I said, as I read into this webcomic to the later episodes, I felt like I knew who these people were a little better. But I think that the introduction of these characters early on was taken for granted, I think, in the writing. And so that's why I think that maybe if someone starts reading this and had a similar experience to me, that they don't know who these people are, they don't know where the jokes are coming from necessarily, or if it has something to do with their character, if they read on, then they'll, I think, more fully appreciate who these characters are.
Yeah, I think I think Davis has kind of set himself up for a little bit of a challenge in that respect, because we start off, in the first stories, we have this cast, and they've clearly all been together for some fairly long period of time, right?
Right.
They're all comfortable with each other. They all know each other very well. They all know each other's mannerisms and traits and bad habits and all of that fun stuff. Which, as a creator, makes things a little more challenging when you're introducing these characters to the reader, right? Because of exactly what you're saying, is that, all of the characters are acting, oh, well, yeah, that's just typical Cracker. And you're going, well, I don't know typical Cracker because I don't know Cracker yet. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't make sense from a character perspective for them to be surprised at some kind of comment that Cracker would make, if that's typical Cracker. There's a storytelling challenge there, and I think
right.
I think by establishing this story with all of these characters already having known and been comfortable with each other for a long period of time, Davis has set himself up for a bit of a challenge in that respect, in that he can't use the characters to introduce the other characters to the reader, I guess, because they've already had their own introductions, right?
Right. Yeah.
So that's kind of a storytelling challenge in jumping through that.
Right. Now, if this is a thin spot of Cosmic Dash, then I think one way that a reader can help make up for that thin or weak spot in the storytelling is to fall back on something that we've referenced earlier, and that is the extensive supplementary information that Davis provides. For instance, if you go to the character list, you'll find detailed descriptions of all the characters, major as well as minor. And so before you read Cosmic Dash, if you read through the complete bios of, and they're not that long, so it's not going to take you forever to get through them, but the major characters, right, especially the crew of the Lucky Strike, then you can begin Cosmic Dash, the earliest episodes, and have that information under your belt and know the characters in ways that at least I didn't. I didn't think to read the character list of the descriptions before reading the webcomic proper. I don't think one should have to do that, but I think in the case of something like Cosmic Dash, it would be helpful. So this is where one of Davis's strengths can help make up for what in the storytelling could be considered either a thin spot or a weakness, if you want to call it that.
That's fair. And you know what? I have to point this out too, because it took me. There's a one joke that Davis has included in his storyline that he's never made explicit, which I appreciate that he's never made explicit. The closest to being an explicit joke is actually on that character page with the medic character. The character's name is Dorian de Lasma. I think that's how you pronounce that.
Yeah.
And I didn't pick up on this. I did the same thing as you did. I read through the story and didn't go to the character page until after I'd read everything. But I did pick it up in the story. It's very subtle. So the character's name is Dorian. And his species, right, because all these aliens they've got different species. One's a Parak, and there's Terracans and Reptoids, or Reptons, I'm sorry. And Dorian's species is a gray. Dorian the Gray. Mm-hmm. I just found that as an amusing joke. Dorian Gray, right, from literature, that he's kind of thrown in there without making it explicit. For some reason, that just tickled me as I was reading through. They make reference to this character as a Gray, but never actually call him Dorian Gray at any point.
It's funny. I didn't even notice that until you pointed it out just now.
Like I said, it's not subtle, and it is subtle, and he doesn't throw it out there anywhere in particular. But I wanted to point that out because that just amused the hell out of me for some reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's clever. Now, along those lines, we were talking about species. We can see all the species on the character page. Now, both Dash and who is an engineer, I guess, who works on the ship,
right,
and the captain of the ship, Mara, their species is Terrakin. Now, we're never really told they're called Terrakin, but we're not given any background information, any exposition about what Terrakin are. Although both of these characters seem to be turtles or turtle-like because both have shells on their back. And in fact, very early on at one point, we saw Dash when he was trying to sleep but couldn't, and he didn't have a shell on. And I think Davis even included a little note that says, his shell is detachable when he wants it to be. But it just has me wondering. I mean, so are Terrakin, is that species what humans would call turtle-like in some way? Again, we don't have much information, and I think that on the one hand, I don't want a writer to hit me over the head, especially at the beginning of a story, with tons of exposition, right? That becomes baggage, as you pointed out earlier.
Right.
At the same time, if you never get to the various points of exposition, that background information, and you're well into the story, that can become problematic in a different way. And I think that even by this second volume, the second episode and the second volume that are completed now, I still don't know exactly what these various species are outside of just their names or other such background information of some of these characters. And maybe that this stuff will be fleshed out in episodes to come. But I would think that by this point, a lot of this information, such as what the hell's a Terrakin, would have been explained by now.
Yeah, personally, I don't know that that's necessary.
Okay.
In the same way that I kind of look at it like watching a movie starring the Muppets, right? You never actually know what kind of bird Big Bird is. Right, but you just, it's a giant 7-foot-tall yellow bird. Fine, and I'll just kind of a bird-like creature of some kind, and you run with it. They never find out really what Gonzo is. Kind of a turkey thing, but not really. We don't know what type of frog.
Gonzo was a turkey thing?
I think they actually call him a kind of like a turkey, but not really. Is the line from the Muppet movie, if I recall correctly. Miss Piggy, we kind of assume to be a pig, but we're not sure what type. Fozzie Bear is a bear of some sort, but we don't know what type. And I don't know that it's really necessary in the case of these stories. We've got a couple of characters we know. Terrakin, Dash and Mara are both Terrakin, right? Because it says so on the character page. But B, they both have the same basic character design with that shell piece that you noted on the back. And Cracker is more of a bird-based creature, right? He's got the beak and seems to be covered in feathers, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that it necessarily needs a whole lot more explanation than, we've got different characters from different races, and sometimes you run into another character from the same race, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
I don't know that it needs to be elaborated on a lot more than that, frankly.
Right. Well, I was just using species as an example of some information that's really not given in the story. And I get your Big Bird reference, and you're right. We don't need to know what kind of bird Big Bird is. But then again, in the Muppet movies, in the Muppet Show on television, on Sesame Street, Big Bird was never referred to by any other name other than Big Bird, right? However, in Cosmic Dash, both Dash and Mara are described as Terrican time and again. So if that is important enough for us to know and to be pointed out in the story itself, then might it be important enough for us to get a little more information about who the Terrican are? In other words, why do they have shells? And I mean, because if you take the shell off of, and the turtleness out of the characters Dash and Mara, you lose nothing. Basically, you get about the exact same thing, and nothing's lost. So I'm wondering, what is it about the way that the characters... And again, I was just using Species as one example, because there are others as well,
right.
With some of their backstory and whatnot. Now, along with this, and let me ask you if... Now, you knew about this webcomic before I did. You introduced me to it. If you did not know the title of this webcomic, who would you think is the main character of this webcomic, if indeed it does have a singular main character?
I would not probably pin down a single main character for this. It floats largely among Dash and Mara and probably Toucan, the Cracker. I'm sorry, Toucan, I guess his name. Probably, I would say those three would be the primary characters, plural, and then obviously then the rest of the Lightning Strike crew after that. I don't know that I necessarily put Dash as the primary protagonist, other than the fact that that his name is used in the title.
Yeah. See, that's why I was wondering. I mean, to me, one of the things about this webcomic is that you don't have one main character; you have an ensemble cast as a character, right? The crew of the Lucky Strike, and I'm okay with that. In fact, I think that makes it a stronger story if you have a narrative that is based around a community of people and not just one or two people. But yet, it's called Cosmic Dash, so it didn't strike me that there wasn't a primary character focused on Dash until I got a few episodes in and we started to get some of the backstory of Dash, and then I thought, oh, okay, well, this is called Cosmic Dash, so maybe Dash is supposed to be the main character here. But in the earliest episodes, I didn't think that was necessarily the case. I read it as an ensemble focus.
Yeah.
And so, again, I'm wondering if maybe David Davis has something in mind, but it's not coming out in the storytelling proper.
I think I'm fairly confident that he's got something in mind for Dash specifically, and I think we will have a very definite character arc for him once this is solid and complete. We've gotten some hints at his backstory, right? He had that sequence there where he wasn't sleeping and having nightmares, and we saw some of his history through that. There's some recent developments in the last story about him. He was pulled aside by the guy who owned the amusement park. The
Walt Disney kind of character.
Yeah, the Walt Disney kind of character. He was pulled aside.
Walter Kimney.
Yes.
Yeah.
He was Dash was pulled aside for like a special, assignments and that kind of thing. There's the sequence there with that thug character who comes back to get wreak vengeance on him from his dad. They actually bring his dad in at some point, and he says, "Hey, we need to find my son, and so we can go on this mission." So I get the sense that over the full story, we're going to see Dash come out as a very definite protagonist in the long term. I kind of look at it, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, talking about it, I kind of looking at it as if we were watching the original Star Wars and we'd only seen the first half of it. You'd say, okay, it's kind of, I can see where Luke would be the main character, but he's not yet. right? We're still on the Death Star trying to save Princess Leia, and Han Solo has got just as much screen time as Luke Skywalker has. We don't really know it as Luke Skywalker's story at that point. So I kind of look at it like that. I think he's kind of got this long game. My impression is he's kind of got this long game plan for Dash. I think we've got enough. I think there's enough hints dropped in the story so far that suggest we're going to see more of that with Dash in the future.
Yeah. You mentioned the Disney-like character, Walter Kimney. And then earlier you've referenced the very subtle joke of Dorian Gray. There are other references throughout Cosmic Dash in terms of the characters. So, for instance, and we don't know yet how evil, if evil he is yet. Another character is Drekar Vadis, who, first off, his name is Drekar, so I can't help but think that Davis had the cologne in mind when he named him, but also phonetically it's not that different from Darth Vader, and definitely the same initials. And so I was thinking about that in light of your Star Wars reference. And then also we get in this story a couple of brothers called the Wutari brothers. Now, phonetically, Wutari brings to mind Atari video games, but also the Wutari brothers are not that dissimilar from the Mario brothers.
Yeah.
So there are these little cultural references throughout Cosmic Dash. Sometimes they're phonetic, sometimes they're visual. I mean, I appreciate that. I've mentioned some of the issues I may have with the storytelling, but I think that Davis's subtle humor at times, and also the ample supplementary material that he gives here, more than makes up for at least initial issues that I had in terms of the story proper. Now, I will say that once you get into the story, at least for me, I came to appreciate it more the further I got into it.
Yeah, I think there's plenty there, particularly if you want to dig around for it, right? Like you said, lots of stuff in the supplemental material, and lots of, I think there's a lot of good material, a lot of good characters once you kind of get to know them and kind of understand where they're coming from a little bit as you get into the story.
Exactly. And Davis, we should point out, also has a Patreon campaign going, so if you go to cosmic-dash.com and you like what you read and you want to support the guy, then he has a link to his Patreon page. Well, Sean, it's that time of the episode where we take a few moments to talk with Jim McClain and Paul Schultz about their, as of this month, brand new and available webcomic, Poe and the Mysteriads.
And we're talking again with Jim McClain and Paul Schultz, the two creators behind the brand new Poe and the Mysteriads webcomic, and we've been talking with them for the past several months as they've been developing it out. We've been talking about them. They've been looking forward to this 2017 launch, and I think we've got hopefully we have some good news to talk to these guys about. So, Jim, Paul, how things been going in the past month? We were supposed to launch in January, and here it is, January 2017. How does things look?
Well, we have a web designer working for me for very little money, and the actual webpage should go up today or tomorrow. We planned on having it on January 1st, but when you hire friends and they work for very little money, you kind of work on their schedule. And unfortunately, she just got a full-time job, so I had to adjust.
Yeah, and so you were saying, Jim, that it would go up today or tomorrow. We should mention we're recording this brief conversation on January 8th, so perhaps by the time people listen to this, the site will be up.
Cross your fingers.
Yes, and again, that URL, I know you told us last month, but just to remind people.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Oh, the URL for the site?
Oh, mysteriads.com, MYSTERIADS.com.
Okay, thanks.
So let me ask you this, Jim, since obviously we can't talk about traffic numbers like we were hoping, right? I think we talked about that last month, or we're hoping to talk about traffic numbers this month. So if you don't mind, we can talk a little bit about the process of getting the website itself up and running, right? You said you'd hired a friend to work on it, and she's, because she's a friend and you're not paying her a whole lot, working on her schedule, and I get that. But has it just been a challenge on that front? Has there been any development conflicts or problems in the development of the site itself, or is it just basically a timing resources issue kind of thing?
Yeah. In fact, she messaged me a few minutes ago saying that she was working on a Franken-puter. She's building a computer for a 10-year-old, and so that's what's occupying her time today. And so she would be available later today. It's like, no big deal. It's like, I don't think we have thousands of people waiting for us to launch, so I don't honestly see it as a really big deal. But no, we have a lot of artwork done. The format for the website's going to be the same as my other website, which she also built. So basically, we're already using that WordPress template, and all we're doing is changing the graphics and some of the wording in the various links. So it's pretty much, the work has already been done, more or less. Right. And all we have to do is rephrase some of the things, put Paul in there instead of my other co-creators on Solution Squad, and then we launch. It's really not that big a deal.
Right. And if we hadn't have given ourselves like a target date, we'd probably still be in the developmental stage of the actual comic. So it's kind of nice to have a date to shoot for. You might not always make it, but it's kind of nice to have it.
And once it does launch, we still have six pages in the bag. We have 6 weeks worth of buffer. So even when we do get going, we're sitting pretty. I'm happy with where we are, considering we're not doing this professionally yet. So
sure. Well, so actually, that you kind of touched on something else there, right there, Jim. Is that you said you got 6 pages done, ready to go, and I know they're not all going to come out on day one here.
No.
Right? You parse them out. But how has development then of the comic been going? And right, because I think actually you had 6 pages when we talked last month too, if I remember right.
No, I think we had 5 because Paul's finishing 6 today. Is it 6 or 7, Paul?
I think it's 7.
7. Okay, I'm sorry. Then it's 7. Wow. So, I mean, we got together. Sat down, we figured out what we want, and with this much buffer, it's like we figured out a schedule. And one of the things that makes this tough is I'm working. I've said this before. I know, full time as a teacher. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she requires a lot of my attention too. And I'm working on finishing my Solution Squad book at the same time. And this is my side project. So the way I work it, I essentially have 2 full-time jobs, and this is my part-time job. So Paul and I decided we would get together on Monday nights on Skype. So we'd at least get together once a week, touch base, and make sure that we have a schedule that we follow so that we don't fall into a trap where we fall behind and lose our buffer.
Right, because if one of us is waiting for the other one, thinking the other one's got something waiting, and it's better just to communicate, so on a regular basis.
So do you think that once the site goes live and you guys are getting reaction from people, you're looking at the numbers, and basically things are in the thick of it, do you feel that you will, let's say, get into a routine where you will make sure that things do go up on time? Oh,
yeah. Well, I mean, I've done a webcomic via WordPress before, and it's really, really simple to upload a page. I mean, that's not going to be an issue. As long as we don't run out of pages, it won't be a problem at all. Uploading comics and making it go live is easy. The only thing that might even slow us down is if we want to add content, like a little blog piece after each one or something like that. So, and I also have a Google Analytics subscription, so I will have hard numbers just as soon as we launch.
Yeah, and I've already set up a schedule for when I work on the book during the week. So, barring a broken hand or sudden blindness, I don't see why I wouldn't have it ready. So,
well, this is something we can talk about in more detail next month once the site goes up and Sean and I look at it. But I'm curious, what kind of options will you include on the site for reader engagement? In other words, to get feedback or any kind of reactions, comments, or what have you.
Well, there will be a comment section for sure, but I also have a screening software to handle that, because on my other website, I think at one point I had 25,000 comments to screen, because when you, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but when you set up a webcomic, you will get the spam of a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And it's garbage. It's just 99.9% garbage, and I'm not exaggerating that number. That's about accurate.
Yeah.
And so I already have that mechanism set up in place too to screen that stuff out. Mm-hmm. So, but there will be a chance for comments. We'll interact, I think, probably more on the Facebook page. We'll try to do both. We'll have the Facebook page, and I haven't really made a big drive to send people there, but once we do launch, I'll put out the word and ask my friends to share the word as well. And so they can go to the Facebook page, then they can go to the website. Probably from there it'll be easier. Facebook seems to be a lot of where my friends hang out, as opposed to, Snapchat or something like the kids these days use.
You said it right there.
And, I didn't think about it, Paul. I'll set up an Instagram page too.
Okay, I know nothing about that, so that's on you.
Well, Instagram is basically, it's just you load pictures and people like it and comment. So okay. I've got that experience as well. It takes like 5 seconds to set up.
Okay.
See, there we go. We're actually getting work done on the podcast. I think that's a first.
Yeah,
I think that's a first for us, Derek.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, when did I come over, Paul? Was it last week? We came over and
I don't think. Last week.
Yeah,
almost just the other day.
We just sat around and kind of chatted. We weren't really worried about it. It's like, well, it'll get done when it gets done. Yeah, it's like, the vacation talk was more fun than talking about business anyway. So, so yeah, actually, we could use this as a work session if it would make it more interesting to the audience. Because this is how stuff gets done. We just sit back and talk back and forth and say, "Hey, what if we did this? Hey, that'd be cool."
Yeah.
Or, no, that really sucks. That really sucks. Let's not do that ever. I mean, Paul and I get along really well. It's like, even when we disagree, it's like no big deal. So
that's because we're friends.
Yeah.
And again, how many pages do you have up and ready to go?
Paul, did you finish your page today?
It's about half done.
6.5.
6.5.
And is it going to be? Let me see. The frequency is it once a week?
Yeah, we're going to do it once a week.
Okay. So you're all set into March.
What I might do is I might post date the first one to January 1st, regardless of when it actually goes up, and then put up one for this week. So I could put it up on a weekly schedule beginning January 1st, which was a Sunday.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
We have enough to go that way. And besides that, the opening page is nothing more than the title of the book and Poe looking over the skyline. So there's not exactly a lot to read that's going to garner comments and engagement. Yeah, so we might just jump in page 1 and then page 2, and you can do that with WordPress. You basically tell it what date you want it to post for, and it will show that date regardless of when you did it.
Right. And so have you decided what day of the week you're going to update?
I think we said Sunday, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I wonder, what your choice of day and how that might affect the number of viewings you get, at least initially.
I have no idea.
I was just putting on the idea that it was a Sunday funny. That was my love for Sundays. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The only thing we're lacking is color.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is, it's like Sunday morning, a lot of people do peruse comics. I mean, I have friends on Facebook who, like Terry Beatty, for example, who does the Sunday Phantom. And he posts every morning when he's, first gets up, the first thing he does is he posts the Phantom. And he also does, what's that Doctor comic? Is it
Rex Morgan?
Yeah, he does Rex Morgan. He does that 7 days a week. So he posts both the Sundays for Rex Morgan and the Phantom Sunday morning. And that seems, I've always enjoyed just going to his page and then clicking it. It's like a ritual. So maybe this could be the same thing for people. I don't know.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Is that going to be something then you look at and study in I know you said you've got Google Analytics and whatever, so are you going to be studying that type of thing with your metrics, or are you just looking at at least initially, just kind of hit counts and that type of thing.
Yeah, we can look at hit counts. We can also look at it live. We can actually see how many people are on the site at one time and where they're from. It's actually really cool. My friend who built the other website showed me how to do it, and it's like I was just like, that's amazing. So when I was at New York Comic Con, for example, she had set it up the week before, and when I was doing a panel, I could literally sit there with my phone and watch people logging in and clicking on it who were sitting in the room at the time. It's just
nice.
That live feed is just really cool. It's fun to watch. And then we can do other stuff too. I hadn't really considered. We could do giveaways. We have a ton of original artwork and stuff. Paul does sketch cards like crazy. We could, and those are more work being done on your show. So Paul can knock out sketch cards like crazy. We could do a weekly contest and then drop one in an envelope and stick it in the mail for
that would be fine with me.
That'd be kind of fun, wouldn't it?
Well,
I love it.
Glad that the Comics Alternative can be a platform for getting more work done on the webcomic.
Yeah.
And I'll have to use that line on my wife, because I don't know that she always buys that. What do you mean? What are you doing? Work? What?
So,
yeah, but it's really not work. It's fun.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when we talk with you guys next month, everything will be up, and we can start talking with you about some of the solid reaction you're getting from readers.
Man, I sure hope so.
Well,
otherwise I will be under the bus.
Yeah.
Voluntarily, I will jump in front of it.
Well, don't do that yet. Give it a little time. Jim and Paul, thanks again for checking in with us and letting us know how things are going. And we're just days, if not moments, away from the launch of Poe and the Mysteriads. So good luck, guys.
So
good luck.
Check the URL and also check the Facebook page, and then if it's going to be delayed, you can find out on the Facebook page, because there wouldn't be anything on the URL yet.
Right.
Very good.
I don't think we have that many likes on the Facebook page. Everybody should really do that too, so we know if they're listening.
Right.
There you go, a call to action.
Oh, actually, you could do that, can't you? Just try that.
So good luck,
and maybe
guys.
Who knows? Maybe I'll spend $5 on an ad.
All right. Thanks very much, guys, and good luck. And we'll talk next month see where we stand and how the Mysteriads are doing.
All right. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Jim and Paul. Always good to check in with you, and good luck. We've got only a couple of weeks under our belt so far, but plenty more where that came from. So we're looking forward to seeing more out of the Poe and the Mysteriads.
That's right.
So are we ready to tackle our last webcomic for the day?
Yes, and the completed webcomic that we're looking at for January is Freedman, and this is a short webcomic by Peter Quash, and I guess I'm pronouncing that name correctly, Quach. And you can find Freedman at peterquach.com. That's peterquach.com. And if you click on comics, then you'll see not only Freedman, but also other webcomics that he has up as well.
Yeah, but Freedman, I think, is one of the older ones, and as I recall, he actually got a little bit of attention from this when it first came out a couple of years ago. This is something he did in 2015, I want to say. Mm-hmm. And I seem to recall something showing up in terms of, hey, go check this out type of messages from the likes of Heidi McDonald and Tom Spurgeon and some of those guys who have news websites. I seem to recall it showing up on their sites at some point.
Yeah, it's a fascinating short story, and as the title suggests, it's about a freedman, a newly freed African American in the postbellum period. So the Civil War has just recently ended, and our protagonist, Charlie Moses, when we see him at the very beginning of the story, and this is only 23 pages long, but after we get past the first page, where we basically have a close-up of his eyes as he's looking at something, and then we turn to the next page. This is taking place at Three Forks of the Trinity in Texas in 1866, and he's standing in front of a burning house with a gun in his hand, and two people, a man and a woman, are apparently dead on the ground in front of him, between him and the burning house. And so you know from the start that something is amiss, and that Charlie Moses has something in some way or another to do with this tragedy that we see in front of us. But then once we turn to page 3, we find the action that starts to take place 12 hours before that moment. Okay? And so this is where we get to the story proper. And in essence, what we have is that Charlie is riding down not very populated area of Texas and comes across an older married couple, Exter and Maud Tellady. And, they've just made it through the Civil War as well. They're no longer slaves. He has, what is his business? Exter.
He's a carpenter.
Is a carpenter, yes. And so, he has made it, kind of a modest living for himself. Both he and his wife Maud are very independent. They no longer have any children. And one of the things that draws Charlie to them is, as Exter tells him, Charlie reminds them of a son they really never had. Because I think they lost it early, right?
No, he was sold in slavery.
Oh, that's right. Sold as well. He lost him early.
Lost him early, yeah.
So lost him not to death, but that they know, but lost him to slavery.
Right.
Which is for them as good as being dead, because they don't know where he is. But they attempt to adopt Charlie, but Charlie is standoffish, right?
Right.
Yeah. And the reason that he is standoffish is because he has something that he has to do, and this has everything to do with his wife, who goes by the name of Caldonia. And I don't want to give too much away. It's a very short story, as we said, so there's not as much narrative space to give away, but I don't want to give what little there is away. So, but Charlie is on the road, and it has everything to do with his wife Caldonia, and that's why he chooses not to stay with the Tellidys.
Right, but worth pointing out that as he's leaving, that's when he's forced to confront some additional decisions that he needs to face, and including kind of where we get the suggestion of the story title is, what does it exactly mean for him to be free, right? Is his freedom a piece of paper written by somebody in the government and granted to him, or is freedom something that he chooses for himself? And that's the crux of the story thematically, I think, right? Is what is true freedom, even if you are captured as a slave, even if you are in chains, is that necessarily free? Yes or no? And
right.
That's the question that Quach is trying to answer here.
Exactly, because Charlie is technically free, although in many ways he's not. And this speech that you're referring to, or this part of the story where Exter talks to Charlie about what it actually does mean to be free, at least for Exter, it begins on page 9 of the webcomic, and they're describing a scene that took place right before this, where Charlie and Exter were in town, and they came across this guy, and I think he's in an old rebel uniform. His name's Jack Ravenel, and he threatened both Charlie and Exter And that bugged Charlie, but it doesn't really seem to bother Exter. And so on page 9, Exter says to Charlie, "You know why I ain't scared of no Ravenel, Charlie? We's free. I get to choose what I do. I choose to make those chairs over there, and I sell 'em in Dallas for a good living. Good enough of a living to let me and Maud build this house here ourselves." And then he asks, Maud, remember what that fool Squire Jackson asked after we were emancipated? And then Maud responds, "Sure do. He asked if freedom meant whites would be working the fields while the coloreds would be sitting in the big house sipping cold tea." And then Exter responds, "Lots of colored folks were like that. No idea what being free meant. But I know. I keep the earnings from my labor. I got a home where I want, and I got my wife beside me. It's a good life being free. Whatever you're out, we're hunting. It ain't worth your life, Charlie. Why don't you stay here with us? You'd be keeping an old couple company, and you could help me with my work." And so basically he's telling him what it actually does mean to be free, of not letting other parts of the world get to you, being able to free yourself, not just from the demands, even the legal demands of others, of being owned by others, but defining your existence on your own terms. I mean, that's basically what it comes right down to. So if you look at Freedman in this way, this is a very existential story.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the key things in having to set it in the mid 1860s, right? Is you kind of have to. It makes for a very good play of the physical freedom versus mental freedom, right? And and you can really provide that nice stark contrast between the two and comparison of the two, and use one to play off the other. And I think the setting of this works very well for that.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about the post-Civil War setting, and I think this also comes across in the colors that Quash chooses to use. They're a series of yellow and brown tones, and even though it doesn't look sepia, it has somewhat that feel to it, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because he doesn't use any of the solid blacks, like you said. It's all kind of this muted browns. And then the gold emphasizes that lightness of the sepia, because sepia, what that was is they were actually using precious metals in the production of the photographs, the original photographs that had that sepia color to them, and so he's kind of emphasizing it here with the flat yellows and oranges as well as the browns that we didn't get that. You don't get that sharp contrast, even though there are harsh lines, and he clearly drew it in a black pen or whatever. The fact that it's all colored brown, it kind of blurs those just a little bit to get that kind of sepia effect, even though it's not technically a sepia.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, it does add to the tone of the story. And I really like this. As we pointed out, this is only 23 pages long, so there's not much of anything there. And in fact, this is shorter than King of the Unknown, which we've already commented on. We're just starting to get into, but there is so much story packed into these 23 pages. I mean, I'm just amazed at what Quash was able to do in this very short amount of space.
And particularly too, if you think about it, he's got not only he's only working with a short number of pages, but he uses several of them for full page splashes too. Mm-hmm. So he was very good at his storytelling here. Is very clear in terms of the story he was trying to tell. He had a very clear message he wanted to get across, and knew exactly how it needed to be put together.
Right. I think that one of the best things about Freedman is the demonstration of Quash's storytelling abilities. I mean, it's compact, it's tight, it's very effective, and again, do not let the 23-page length fool you. There is a lot here.
Yeah, I almost wonder if that actually worked in his advantage. Knowing that he was going to do something so short, he was able to pull it in together very tightly, as opposed to somebody who's doing a webcomic with no set end. It's one of those where, I could go off on a tangent here. I can go off on a tangent here. I might play a bit with here. The fact that he may have started, if he started saying, you know what, I'm going to do this in 23 pages, period, done, end of story, that forces you as a creator, I think, to be a lot crisper, a lot tighter with your storytelling. And that really shows here. And I think, to exactly what you said, it highlights very well and speaks very well to Quach's storytelling ability.
Right. Now, have you looked at some of the other comics on Quach's website?
Not as closely, but yeah, I have looked at them.
Yeah, because they're all short. And so I think that is where his talents lie, in short storytelling, because I don't really see any longer than the 23 pages that we have with Freedman. And in fact, most of them that I've seen are, let's say, 10 pages or 5 pages or under.
Yeah.
One of the ones that he has up, it's a story, I haven't read this one, it's called Temporary, and that one is 6 pages long.
Yeah. He's definitely got that short story format down very well, I think.
Yeah.
And there's nothing there, I think that might be something that a lot of people miss out on, is they think, okay, I've got to do a long story because that's what people like and that's what's grand and that's what wins the Eisner Awards or whatever. I don't think that's necessarily true. And especially, if you can sit down and focus in on your short story, whether it's 6 pages or 10 pages or 20 pages, you can still tell something strong and powerful and very effectively. And I think Quach is very good at doing that.
In addition to that, and we haven't mentioned this yet, and we do not often see this, if at all, on the various webcomics that we look at for this series, or at least I don't remember seeing this in the past, is that Quach offers not only webcomic versions of his comics, but you can also get them in other formats. So, for instance, if you wanted to read Freedman through a web browser, as you and I have, then you can do so. But if you prefer to download the PDF of the comic or the CRB version of it, you can do that and read it on a computer or a mobile device, a tablet or something, that way. And I think that's great. It changes it from something a little more than a web comic, but that's okay because it gives us options of format.
Yeah, and to play off that idea on what he's doing a little differently too, I don't know if you caught this or not, but certainly Freedman, I think many of his other comics, if not all of his other comics, he specifically licenses under a Creative Commons license, which means that he doesn't care where this goes. If you want to put this in your newsletter or something, he's absolutely okay with that and basically saying, yeah, you have my permission to do that. Just as long as you're not making money off of it, you're not printing them up and selling them as your own or something, he's fine with that. And I think that's, as a business model, I don't know whether or not that works for him, if that gets his name out more, but it's certainly an interesting direction that he's kind of taking that notion of making it as available as possible, right? You can read it as on the web, you can read it as a PDF, you can read it as a CBZ, and you can share it around as much as you want, and he's cool with that. So
exactly.
I think that's an interesting approach. I don't know that I've seen something specifically like that before.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm thinking about doing this semester, you're talking about people, using this in whatever ways they see fit. I'm really thinking about starting off one of my classes this semester with Freedman,
sure.
as an example of new media storytelling that I think is phenomenal. Again, a short story that's concise, it's clean, it's to the point, tightly woven, and there's a lot packed into those 23 pages. And I know that a lot of my students are really into webcomics, and I want to show them this webcomic just to demonstrate that you can tell a very good story over just a few installments.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent idea. I'd certainly be signing up for that class.
The one other piece that I read on Peter Quach's site is I am a racist and so can you, just because of the racist element to it, or it deals with racism in light of having just read Freedman. Did you read this one?
I recall reading it earlier. I did not refresh my memory here recently with it, no.
Yeah. And it seems to be an autobiographical story, or at least I guess it is. because the character seems to be, I mean, there's a drawing of Peter Quach at the top of his website. I guess this is the same person. I don't know. But also the title is in the first person. I am a racist, and so can you. And it's a funny 5-page story about the protagonist. Do we call him Peter? Perhaps.
Sure.
And it takes place during the 2008 election. This is the first election with Obama, and he and his significant other are watching television, and they hear a newscaster say that the vice presidential nominee, Sarah, I cannot hold a job, Palin, calling Obama someone who pals around with terrorists, and his girlfriend says, "This is ridiculous. How can people believe this crap?" And then I guess this character, Peter, says, "Actually, it's pretty simple. I grew up in Indiana, Katie, and there's still a part of Indiana inside me every time I see an image of Obama." And so this 5-page story is basically that he grew up in a racist culture, even though he's not racist himself. Because he grew up in that culture, there's a part of him that reacts in kind of a racist way to Obama, and then, the assumption is other issues that are race-related. And he represents this little bit of a racist inside of him by this tiny figure of a hooded KKK figure in his innards, in his stomach. And I just think that's it's great. It's a great way of conceptualizing this. And he's actually right. I mean, I spent quite a number of years in Indiana, and even though Indiana is not a southern state, and I am from the South, I grew up in North Carolina. Indiana's like a southern state in the Midwest.
I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of, I don't want to say hidden per se, but there's a lot of stuff that, a lot of racist elements that people don't realize are there. I mean, throughout the entire country, not just, don't want to pick on Indiana, although I do have a lot of problems with Indiana. I'm not going to pick on it for that. But, there's a lot of little things throughout the country. I mean, you get into those discussions, and we can go off for another couple hours on this easily. But, there's a lot of these racist elements that are built into the whole structure of the community, right? The whole, the police system, the education system, all the various government programs that are out there.
Built into our very language.
It's built into our language. It's built into our culture. There's no way you can not escape this at some level, and the key is recognizing that that's there and recognizing that what those elements are. And it's only after you kind of acknowledge that and kind of, check your privilege, right, or check your racism, that you're able to kind of start to counteract that. And that's what we're seeing in a lot of places. And I think what this is in part reaction to is that people are kind of seeing it for the first time for any variety of reasons. And I think what Quach is trying to do is saying, yeah, it's there. It's not Klansmen necessarily. I mean, you think racism, you think of the lynchings and, all those horrible things along those lines. But there's all of this stuff that's built into the very fabric of the culture. And there's a little bit of that in every one of us because we've all grown up with it. It's built into that system, and that's the system we were raised under. So how can you not have some of that inside of you?
Yeah. And, the action in this short comic takes place 2008 and then 2012, those two of Obama's presidential elections. But this is a webcomic that is very timely. You can read it in 2017, especially on the cusp of the Trump presidency, and it pains me every time I hear that term, the Trump presidency.
I try not to say it.
Yes, and it is. In fact, I would argue it's even more timely today than it was when Quach wrote this and published it back in 2012.
I would say it's not more time. It's not any more timely, but it's not any less timely. But I would say that it is.
I say it's more timely because it proves his point. because the very last panel basically undermines this whole idea that a lot of people were spouting in 2008, that we're living in a post-racial era now. And I remember that was so ridiculous when people were saying that just because we elected an African-American president, does that mean that we're beyond racism or we're beyond conceptions of race as we've normally understood them? Of course it wasn't, but people were saying that. And that's what the very last panels of this story say. So if you thought that prejudice, racial bigotry in any form whatsoever, major, subtle, what have you, is behind us at all, especially on the cusp of the Trump presidency, we know that that's not the case now, given what we experienced over the past year and a half. And so that's why I say that this comic is even more timely now, because it proves the point. I mean, it's basically an illustration of the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I wouldn't, like I said, I don't think it's any less relevant. Where I was going with that was that I think there was a Saturday Night Live sketch. I don't know, probably 2 months ago now. That one where there was a group of people watching TV on election night. And you had Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock as the only two black characters there. And their commentary was, the white people who are all watching this are going, "Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening." And the two black people are saying, "Well, yeah, this is happening. This is exactly what you'd expect to happen. We've known this for years and years and years, and you guys are just now waking up to this." and I think and that's kind of why I say that it's not any more relevant, because I think people who are aware of this and were seeing this back in 2008, back in 2012, back in 2005. If you want to go back further, I think there were a number of people who were seeing this before, and this is old news. And it's where I was going with that is this isn't more relevant, but I was going to add that I think there are more people who would be more willing and receptive to the message in this than they were in 2012 or in 2008.
Okay, good point. Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a nuance there, I guess. Splitting hairs, perhaps, a little semantic, but
no, that's a good point. I agree.
I think this is a message that some people knew years and years ago, and there are some people who, this seems more relevant now, but it really is just that they're more receptive to it.
Mm. Well, as those of you listening to this right now, you could tell that with the short stories that Peter Quach has on his website, peterquach.com, and, we focused primarily on Freedman, although we've discussed I'm a Racist and So Can You, but there are others on this site as well. Even these very short, like 4 or 5 page pieces, generate a lot of discussion potential. So, as we were pointing out with Freedman, there is a lot packed into just a few pages.
Yeah, he's clearly got his talents down very well for short stories format, and he's clearly hitting not only some good storytelling but some good messaging. That obviously creating this kind of discussion, I think, says a lot about a 5 or 10 page story.
Well, we've had a lot to discuss for the month of January, our first webcomics episode of the new year. We started off with Marcus Muller's King of the Unknown. After that, we looked at Cosmic Dash by David Davis. And then we wrapped up with a short completed webcomic by Peter Quach, Freedman. Great stuff.
Absolutely. I enjoyed all of them.
That's right. And if you want to find other great comics, even though they may not be viewable through your web browser. Definitely check out the websites of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service and My Digital Comics. So that's dcbservice.com and mydigitalcomics.com. There you'll find a lot of great discounts on hard copy and digital comics. And after you do get your stories there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to the website comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
And if you want to send us a link to a webcomic that you want us to check out and think might be something we'd be interested in, you can email us, Comics Alternative. It's two guys, TWOGUIS, at comicsalternative.com. Or you can email me directly at Sean, SEAN, at comicsalternative.com.
And you can email me at Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us all over social media, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, simply by going to our website, comicsalternative.com.
I, for the life of me, cannot understand how you can keep all of those different platforms straight.
Well, when you've done as many episodes as we have for over 4 years now, and when you say as many times, get in touch with us these ways as I have, I say it in my sleep.
I feel sorry for your wife. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. But we will be back in another month with more webcomic goodness. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and we'll see you next month.